Ranking Member Issa. Mr. Lewis, you've been with Bank of America and its predecessor companies for how long?
September will be 40 years.
40 years. How many mergers or acquisitions have you personally been involved with in your career?
I would have to take a few moments and count them up, but obviously probably more than one, less than 10.
Okay. Would this be the largest merger or acquisition that your company and the predecessor companies have taken?
No, the Nations Bank of America acquisition would have probably been, I would have to think back to the market caps and things, but that would be the biggest, and this would be one of the biggest, however.
Certainly. Now, in terms of how you analyze these deals, do you have a process within your bank to analyze appropriate growth measures and acquiring other institutions or merging with other institutions?
We do.
You do. And did you conduct that same method with this Merrill acquisition?
Yes, we did. We used the same methodology.
Okay. Thank you. My time has expired, and I've got other questions in that regard later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me now yield to the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Kucinich, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, our investigation, Mr. Lewis, also finds that Fed officials believe that you were potentially liable for violating security laws by withholding material information in your possession from shareholders before the vote to approve the merger with Merrill Lynch on December 5th, 2008. Mr. Lewis, please look at the following email from the Fed's General Counsel to Chairman Bernanke on December 23, 2008. Quote, "A different question that doesn't seem to be the one Lewis is focused on is related to disclosure. Management may be exposed if it doesn't properly disclose information that is material to investors. His potential liability here will be whether he knew or reasonably should have known the magnitude of Merrill Lynch losses when Bank of America made its disclosure to get the shareholder vote on the Merrill Lynch deal in early December," unquote. Mr. Lewis, did Bank of America supplement the proxy solicitation it sent to shareholders with what the company learned in mid-November about the rapidly mounting losses and potential for future losses at Merrill Lynch before the shareholder vote on December 5th?
Congressman, if we take disclosure very, very seriously.
Were there supplements? Can you say were there supplements?
If anybody in our legal group had suggested we do anything of that nature, we would have done it.
There were no supplements, isn't that right?
There was no suggestions to have a supplement.
There were no supplements, okay. So, Mr. Lewis, look at the following email that circulated among officials at the Richmond Fed on December 23, 2008. Quote, "I think he's worried about stockholder suits, knows they did not do a good job of due diligence, and the issues facing the company are finally hitting home, and he's worried about his own job after cutting loose lots of very good people," unquote. Now, Mr. Lewis, was your decision to tell the government you were considering invoking a MAC, which of course refers to a clause in a merger agreement that allows the acquirer to abandon the deal if a material adverse change is judged to have occurred, was your threat to invoke a MAC, in fact, a strategy you deployed to protect yourself from shareholder lawsuits?
No, it was not.
Isn't it true, Mr. Lewis, that during the course of your conversations with Chairman Bernanke and Secretary Paulson, you in fact requested a letter from the government saying that the government ordered you to close the deal to acquire Merrill?
No, that was not what I asked for. Our board was concerned.
Your answer is no? Are you sure that's your answer?
Our board was concerned that we had verbal assurances but had nothing in writing about getting some assistance. And so I called Chairman Bernanke and asked him.
But you're referring to a different letter. I'm talking about a letter. You requested a letter from the government saying that the government ordered you to close the deal to acquire Merrill. Wasn't there such a letter?
I don't recall such a letter.
You're under oath, but your answer is you don't recall.
I do not recall.
Isn't it true that your request of that letter was motivated by your desire to protect yourself from your shareholders?
Well, sir, if I can't recall it, I can't answer the second question.
Our investigation reveals that Chairman Bernanke believed that your request for such a letter was motivated by a desire to protect you from shareholder lawsuits, as demonstrated in this email from Chairman Bernanke to the Fed's General Counsel on December 23, 2008, and I quote, he, speaking of you, Mr. Lewis, said he now fears lawsuits from shareholders for not invoking the MAC, given the deterioration at Merrill Lynch. He, speaking of you, Mr. Lewis, still asked whether he could use as a defense that the government ordered him to proceed for systemic reasons. I said no, unquote. This is from Chairman Bernanke. Mr. Lewis, is Chairman Bernanke's email describing his call with you an accurate statement of your concerns and of Bank of America's situation?
I can't recall the exact email, but we did have concerns, and we wanted some assurances that they would support our position.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I now yield to the ranking member of Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me go back to this so-called threat concern here, Mr. Lewis. And I just want to be clear, on December 17th, when you called Mr. Paulson, Mr. Bernanke, did you, I just want to know the nature of your call. Did you say we are going to exercise the MAC clause, or did you say we are thinking about exercising the MAC clause?
Again, it seems like a long time ago. To the best of my recollection, I said we are strongly considering a MAC.
So in other words, what the response you then got changed your decision. You were going to exercise the clause. You felt that was the best interest of your bank, of your shareholders. You were going to do it, and then what the government told you, based on what the government told you, you took a different course.
No, sir. It was a factor because they felt so strongly, but it was not the only factor in making the decision. We also thought, after a lot of consideration, that there was downside risk in not winning the MAC.
Let me change direction, because we've talked about this a lot, and I want to get to just a big concern I have with the unprecedented level of involvement the government now has in the private sector in way too many industries, in my judgment. And let me provide a little context. I was on a conference call a week ago Sunday with members of the auto task force talking about the GM situation. I happen to come from car country, as I said in my opening statement. We had a GM plant that was closed a week ago Monday, 800 jobs, 800 families, and the whole community impacted, as you would expect. The night before that announcement, we were on this conference call. Members of the task force talked about what was going to happen. And one member of the auto task force indicated, he said, we are not going to run General Motors. We will only get involved if there's a major event. And there's a direct, major event was the language he used. And they explained the whole deal. When we got down, I asked a question. I said, it was Mr. Sperling who made that statement. I said, Mr. Sperling, define major event. Define what's major. And I said, because it's going to be pretty major tomorrow in our district when 800 people find out they're not going to have a job. And he didn't have a definition. In fact, he said, we don't have a working definition. It would be something along the lines of a merger, a major change in corporate strategy, which basically told me it could be any darn thing they wanted it to be. So my question to you is, what day-to-day involvement does the government have in decisions you are making relative to TARP funds, relative to any, talk about, if any, talk about that, if you would, please.
Well, so there is an oversight committee, or a TARP committee that actually does look at our lending and seeing if we're using the TARP funds to lend money. And so that is a report we just requested. There obviously is the involvement of our regulators as they normally would be. But in terms
I'm talking over that, more than that.
The only involvement that would be explicit would be after we were ordered to attain more capital as a part of this stress test. They did suggest to all banks that were raising that capital to relook at their boards for financial expertise and to look at their management and succession as a part of this process. And we have been doing that, but no day-to-day decisions made by regulators.
Okay, talk to me about TARP dollars, any TARP funds you have. Any kind of undue influence you felt there in relation to when you initially accepted the TARP dollars?
No undue influence, no, sir.
Okay. I'll be happy to yield to